makers. The construction sector was just throwing off so many positives in terms of employment creation, in terms of tax revenues, that our policymakers really didn't believe there was any need to focus in on other sectors of the economy. So in other words, we became a little bit like a bird flying on one wing. That wing has been cut off, and we now find ourselves in a seriously vulnerable situation, obviously. Serious loss of competitiveness. Undoubtedly, the behaviour of the financial system in terms of expanding credit has been totally inappropriate. But the other side of the equation is, we have to take some personal responsibility as well. Because, okay, on the one side, banks were extending credit aggressively, but on the other side of the equation, there was a lot of willing recipients out there. So there's no point going around blaming each other for the crisis we're in. There is a sense of collective responsibility. We've had a total failure on the regulatory front as it applies to the financial service industry. There's no doubt about that. We're not unique in that regard. If you look at the US regulatory system, the subprime crisis should never have been allowed to happen in the first place. So there has been a serious regulatory failure. Bottom line really is that over the last 6 or 7 years, whether we realise it or not as we lived through it, we did allow a bubble economy to develop. And as is always the case with bubbles, they do burst. And when they do, the economic and financial and social fallout is quite serious. So that's what we're living through. Just touch very briefly on the interest rate side. The good news, and this is the one piece of really good news out there, the interest rate environment has been improving dramatically. The European Central Bank has taken 3% off rates since last October. There is certainly, in my view, further downside potential. There's going to be another 0.25% on the downside for interest rates. Rates will bottom out there. I'm not sure how long rates are going to remain down, but the one thing I am sure about is that once we start to see the first concrete signs of recovery in the European economy, the European Central Bank will move quickly to take the interest rate cycle back to what it would regard as more normal levels. So there is a window of opportunity which is probably going to last about 12 months when interest rates remain rock bottom. But they will go up, as I say, as soon as the European Central Bank senses economic recovery in the Eurozone. So the danger from Ireland's perspective is that when the rate cycle starts to go up, the economy won't be able to sustain it. So I think we need to be extremely careful about that. What is the road to recovery? Well, I think I've outlined the economic background. 2009, a very, very difficult year. We're looking at growth contracting by at least 8%, possibly a little bit more. That is savage. And based on the most optimistic projections you could make at the moment, the economy is likely to contract by another 2 or 3% next year. We hope that by 2011, against the background of a stronger external environment, that we will go back into positive territory again. But there are no guarantees about that. To me, the biggest challenge for Ireland is to ensure that as the international economic cycle starts to improve, that we will be in a position to exploit that recovery. So the conditions for recovery in Ireland over the next 2 or 3 years, we need to see the international cycle improving. We need to see a stabilisation of the housing market. Next year, we're looking at the probability that we'll complete around 15,000 houses in the country. That compares to 93,000 back in 2006. And the rule of thumb roughly is that for every 10,000 houses less we build, it knocks about 1% off economic growth. So that's the painful story of the Irish economy, is this housing market adjustment. But 15,000 should represent the bottom of the housing cycle, and thereafter, next year, and thereafter, we should see, hopefully, a gradual recovery in house building. But the one thing, before we start talking about recovery, we need to see the downward momentum being arrested. That certainly hasn't happened yet. We obviously need to see a solution to the banking crisis. It would be nice to see an improvement in the sterling-euro exchange rate. There's nothing we can do about that. And I suppose my sense would be that sterling as a currency is likely to remain under downward pressure for the foreseeable future. We need to see fiscal certainty. In other words, remove this uncertainty about how much extra tax we're all going to be paying over the coming years. And most important thing of all really is we need to restore competitiveness as an economy. We need to price ourselves back into markets. In terms of competitiveness, I'm talking about the overall cost base of the economy. Within the public sector, we need to see a much greater focus on what we get, the outputs from public spending, rather than the inputs. Politicians tend to argue, we've increased spending on health and education by X euro over recent years. There has been much less focus on what we've actually got for that spending. So there needs to be a strong focus on value for money from public spending in an environment where resources by definition are going to be much scarcer. We need to see cheaper housing. That is being delivered. I believe that from the peak of the market in 2006 to the trough in the housing market, which I think will be seen next year, house prices will have corrected by about 60%. We need lower fuel and energy costs. We need lower local authority charges for business around the country. We need to see a focus on the quality of the labour supply. So that's why I think education, training, it is the most important thing for the short and long term future of the Irish economy. We need a strong IT capability. Our performance in terms of IT, international leagues of broadband, for example, we do not score very highly. We need to address that situation. We will have to broaden the tax base. One of the policy failures of recent years was we allowed the base in which we collect taxes narrow too much. So there will obviously be huge requirements to broaden the tax base. To me, the most economically efficient tax system is one based on a lot of people paying tax at low marginal rates of taxation. That to me is the most economically efficient. We need a proper regulatory framework. We need a functioning banking system. And I suppose most of all, we need to address the external image of Ireland and reverse a lot of the undoubted damage that has been done. I think we need to create some sort of strategic vision for Ireland. A lot of what I see on a day-to-day basis is firefighting from government. They need to stand back, take a strategic vision. Where is Ireland going to be 5-10 years down the road? What are the drivers of the economy going to be? First thing we should never forget, we are a small open economy. We do not have a domestic market of sufficient scale to sustain itself. We need to get back into the business of exporting. We need to focus on the quality of economic activity rather than the quantity. We need to start looking at the sectoral winners of the future. Foreign direct investment is clearly going to continue to play a very important role, not least in the southwest, where the chemical and pharmaceutical industry is so important. So foreign direct investment is going to remain an important part of the equation, but the nature of it is changing. And I think the announcement we had here in Cork a few weeks ago with Big Fish, for example, that's indicative of the type of foreign direct investment we're going to get into the future. I believe the agri-food sector, we need to refocus there. It has a key role to play. It's a high value added industry that Ireland is pretty good at. We need to focus in on tourism. We need to focus in on service exports. In other words, selling our professional services overseas. I'm talking about legal expertise. I'm talking about construction expertise. I'm talking about education. So we get the professional services we have as an economy and start exporting those services to parts of the world that need those services. And to me, one of the greatest and best examples of this is a company called Project Management, which has exploited this particular area very, very well. Research and development, IT is a solution provider. We need a flexible labour market. We need effective anti-corruption laws and enforcement. We need effective regulatory institutions. So I suppose those latter 2 or 3 points really focus in on the whole issue of improving the external image of Ireland, as I've stressed. The final thing, I suppose my overall vision for Ireland really is one based on entrepreneurial capitalism with a very strong focus on developing a lot of small and medium-sized businesses in this country and creating the environment where those businesses can grow. I realise I'm starting to come up against the clock, so I'll skip through the rest pretty quickly.